Okay, so here we're going to start chapter 4. It's consumption choices. So I have a few things written on the board. They become more clear as we go. So chapter 4, consumption choices. The previous chapter, chapter 3, was production choices. So chapter 3 was kind of mainly, the company, the firm looking at the customer. It was all about the quantity that we produce, assuming that we are the firm, the company. What we're kind of concerned with is the quantity that we produce. So chapter 4 is very, very similar. Uh, we explain all this again later because it's hard to kind of explain it coherently, but chapter 4 is very similar to chapter 3. Chapter 4 is consumption choices. It's very, very similar concepts. The money that we have or the quantity that we want. That's a U right there. But this is more the customer looking at the company or the customer looking at the firm. So just to kind of say that a little bit, it doesn't have a lot to do with the math, but chapter 3 was basically the firm and what we produce, and we're looking at the consumer. Yeah. And then chapter 4, consumption choices, it's looking the opposite direction. It's the consumer, looking more at the company, what they produce, and how much we want or how much money we have or something. So we cover all this again later. Um, I just want to kind of make this distinction right now. We're going to do a lot of theory. Let me just kind of look for a second. We're on page 71 in the book here. Yes, but about the math is always more important, and the theory is very easy, but it's kind of hard to conceptualize a lot of the concepts, or how do we say, some of the kind of the examples they kind of give us. The first 5 pages, that's page 71 to 76. It's some of the introduction and theory, and then the chapter really starts on page 77. So um it'll probably take a few videos, I'm sure, but we just want to uh not skip the first 5 pages, but just kind of go through them fairly quick. Okay, so later it's kind of getting to this. So this is not all of chapter 3, but this is the basic idea. I'm just making a quick comparison, which sometime in the future I'm sure will come again. But most of chapter 3 was basically quantity as a function of, I suppose, capital and labor. And you have the isoquant and the isocost. And out of all the concepts, that point where they meet, that was really the only concept. And of course, the Cobb Douglas, which I've drawn, there's more possibilities in the world, but the whole book is kind of governed by the Cobb Douglas, or Cobb Douglas is, the all-star of the book there. Yeah. But the only thing I'm drawing here is on the left. Yeah. So on the left is kind of the beginning on chapter 4. That's where we're kind of going, starting on page I think 76, as we're going to this over here. So it's all the same graphs, it's different concepts, but chapter 4 is very reflective of chapter 3. I have to kind of read it again, but if I'm remembering, all of chapter 4 is basically exactly or almost exactly the same as chapter 3. It's all the exact same math, all the same concepts, but with different concepts, all the same math, but with different concepts. So chapter 4, we have this thing called utility. It can be described different ways, but it's best described as our preference. Utility. Utility is basically our preference, and it can be preference. The quantity, our preference as a function. U is our utility. U is our utility, or utility is another word, kind of for preference. Utility is it's not like happy or sad or very stressed, low stressed, but those concepts are in there. It's just kind of more a preference. And utility can be a function of quantity, the quantity of something that we want. Of course, more than one quantity of different things. But more often than not, this is 90 or 100% of the time as we go through further chapters, chapter 4, but chapter 5 and beyond. Utility is simply a function of money, and I don't want to go too far. I always go a little bit too far. Sometimes, not usually, sometimes the utility is money. In some of the further chapters, it can be confusing when they do that. But usually, we're not saying that utility is money. Utility is preference, and it's typically always a function of money. So I is income. Yeah, what is I? That's income. If you ever see X, that's the same as I. It's just you can call it X or I. It doesn't matter. Those are the same. But It's not just money, yes, but if you look at certain things as kind of gambling, which we will in the future, yeah, in future chapters, we're up money or we're down money. So our utility, our preference is a function of, how much our money increases or decreases. Uh, but in the beginning, our utility is a function of quantity. But it's going to be the same. It's Cobb Douglas here, and this doesn't make sense until later once we do the math. But the actual math that we do is very, very similar to chapter 3. It's just going to be our preference. Utility is a function of money and things like that. Okay, so as usual, kind of rambling there a little bit. It's just hard to kind of squeeze all that in. But we start the chapter now, and we're just going to kind of peruse through the first 5 pages of this thing here. So this is chapter 4. This is consumption choices, kind of the consumer looking at the company. So I think a lot of this we don't really have to read through. Preferences and utility functions. You will make many, many choices throughout your life. Some choices can have a big impact on your life, such as choosing your college major. So I kind of went through this before. We can always kind of read along if we want. Later, they're going to talk about how preference is your utility. As I said, utility is your preference. Okay, so they talk about, ranking our preferences. Alternative X is better than Y. Alternatives X and Y are equal. Alternative Y is better than X. A lot of the ideas that they present here, they're not really important as far as the math in the future. Okay, so we go through. Yeah, so they kind of they do define these properties here. Yeah. Okay, so your preference over the set of alternatives is simply how you rank all alternatives. We assume that an individual's preference satisfy the following 3 assumptions. So there's always kind of they're very simple, but there's always kind of a few, basic concepts. Very easy, but kind of hard to put into words when they have some of the basic theory. So it's very similar to math, is especially the transitive property. Yeah, these are literally properties kind of trying to illustrate the ideas behind a consumption. But the consumer can rank any 2 alternatives in the set of possible alternatives. Okay, so that's we literally prefer X over Y. We have things like that where we kind of stack our preference up. I know it seems very silly, but they do that. So then if alternative X is better than alternative Y and Y is better than Z, then obviously X would be preferred over Z. They call that the transitive property. Okay, so continuity is kind of a strange one there. Let's kind of read that. But if alternative X is better than alternative Y, then alternatives sufficiently similar to X are also better than Y. So they'll do kind of something in just a little bit here, not too long from here. But if we have X as like a giant bag of potato chips and Y is like a small bag of pretzels, they do use that example a little bit later. Marginal is always, sufficiently more, sufficiently less. If we have alternatives that are very similar to X, like maybe we take away just a few potato chips or something, we still probably preferred over Y, but uh, because we don't want to spend too long on concepts that don't really, usually if we have a test, something like this will not come up on the test. Yeah. But they're just kind of saying it's not the only way to say it. That's what I'm struggling to communicate. But one way to say that is that sufficiently small changes in X will still make X greater than Y. So let's continue this, I think, in the next video here.